Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we bring you day 516 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Olexiy Arestovych, and Mark Feygin, Russian opposition politician, lawyer, and blogger. Today's thanks go to Darren Matthews and Hill and Andre for supporting our channel. This is very appreciated. Thank you guys for sticking with us. And with that, let's take a look at day 516. Enjoy. Dear friends, glad to see you all on Feygin Live. It is Monday, July 24th. By the way, 16 months of war, I think. Full months of war, same time in Kiev and Moscow. And we're doing day 516 with Olexiy Arestovych. Olexiy, hello. Yes, good evening, everybody. Alright, we have 26,000 starting with us, 8,000 clicked the like button to start the stream with. Would be nice if you would continue sharing links in your social media and click the like button, and of course subscribe to Feygin Live, to Olexiy Arestovych, and to the Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that in English and you have not subscribed yet. And we are starting a new stream. We stopped last time at day 514 on a topic which plans Kremlin might be looking at, Lukashenko and PMC Wagner, and events unfolded basically a day or two after our discussion, when you mentioned the possibility when Wagner could break the border and perhaps make a motion towards Vilnius or some other places. And suddenly Lukashenko comes out. I don't know if you watched our stream, but suddenly in his speech there is Warsaw and Joshua. And I don't know if he's supporting our opinion, our warning, and our discussion, or he indeed is just parallel things unfolding. And this is a protocol video, so none of these would be published unless they wanted it to be published. So this is something to consider. Take a look. Wagners are asking us to go to the western border. I'm asking them, why do you want to go? But they're answering that they want to go to on an excursion to see Warsaw and Rzeszów, because Rzeszów is unacceptable to them. When they were fighting near Artemovsk, they know where the military equipment was coming from or through, and that's where they know from that Rzeszów is trouble. And of course, I'm keeping them in the middle of Belarus. I would not want to move them or relocate them towards the border, because their moods are very angry, and one needs to pay attention because they do know what is happening around the borders of our union, and we're trying to handle them to still keep them at bay, but I do ask you to keep supporting us as well. So yeah, I like that's an interesting clip. Putin is smiling, rotating his head, and his extra high heels that he is playing with while he's sitting in the chair in a weird pose. So there are several interesting things worthy of mentioning in this speech. First is that Wagner is asking to be deployed. So I don't know, that could be plans, that could be just a projection they wanted to send to everybody. The second point, that he is making a statement, he is controlling Wagner. And I think it's about 3,500 of them in Belarus. And the third point is that he'll discuss it with Vladimir Putin, because likely there is going to be a monetary issue involved as well, because, right, they're sitting there in Belarus eating and all. So he probably is visiting Moscow for some money. What do you think? Well, first of all, Baltic countries stopped loving us. They stopped loving us as much as they did until the last stream. Nobody likes bad prognosis about themselves. And most people don't listen attentively. So yeah, that's the blowback. Today, Poles came out and said that they'll create a special detachment that will be tasked with resisting a possible threat from Wagner. It'll be engineer battalion, and I understand they'll be fortifying the border. It's an engineer battalion. They usually do not go into the firefight, so they probably will be fortifying the border. That's more engineering solution. But I think that's what's happening, is that Kremlin is raising stakes. They're creating different platforms, different areas where they can initiate discussion, and they are increasing the cost and stakes of continuing further. So Russian withdrawal from grain deal and creating a threat of hunger to some countries in Africa, and the perspective of new waves of refugees into the southern Europe. So that's one platform. Another is a threat from Belarus. And as we see, their statement actually go into a very logical chain of escalating, from supplying nukes to Belarus to moving Wagner troops to Belarus, and now slips of tongue, supposedly, as if that Putin mentioned about the Suvalkov corridor, and now Belarus is talking about Wagner probably going across the border towards Rzeszów. Of course, they're not going to any Rzeszów, but they do want to play this card, and they might send them somewhere, but I don't think they'll send that across the western border. But it still remains a marginal scenario, marginally possible one, and one would be smart to be ready for all eventualities, because then you'll be ready for anything else. And frankly, they could have gone not to Vilnius, but to Daugavpils in Latvia, which is much closer to the border, and it's much easier, much more within reach. So there is some risk, but there are very few rational conclusions that would draw Wagner to do that, because NATO would react to that. Belarus becomes an actual aggressor in this case. There are a lot of rational, logical conclusions that would tell you, no, this is not going to happen. But I do want to remind that before the beginning of war with Ukraine, there were very few logical conclusions that would lead to assume that Russia would invade Ukraine. About a year and a half ago, it was very illogical to consider that Russia will decide to invade Ukraine. And also there was the First World War, which is still called the most weird war by a lot of historians. Very few can answer why did it even start in the way it did, and why did it go for as long as it did. But the world, I want to remind you that the world consists of countries which borders, to a notable extent, are shaped by the wars that should not have happened. And Sevis pacem para bellum, if you want to live in peace, be ready for war. So Poles are taking threats seriously. They're already establishing detachments to counter that threat. And I'm thinking there could be provocations of a different kind. There could be some diversion groups crossing the border. There could be some shooting across the border, blowing up maybe some of the border vehicles, maybe sending extra waves of refugees one way or another, maybe refugees and then Wagner behind them. Perhaps they won't even be refugees, but there'll be informational pressure with possible threats of more refugees coming and just disturbing the population. So they will continue that game. This is 100%. What other notes, what other assurances does one need when the leader of these possible offending countries are coming out and making these threats? What would the world think if a president of Vietnam would come and say, "I want to go to Cambodia. We want to go to Cambodia. We have some guys here who want to go across the border and the next region." That would be a huge scandal, international scandal. So the fact that these so-called leaders allow themselves these statements, this is one of the signs of inadequacy, and another is a sign of being ready for use of brute force. And even if it remains to live in information media field, they still are pushing the topic. And to what degree they're ready to implement that in physical world, we'll see. It's still unclear, but I would suggest be ready to the worst, for the worst variant. All right. Thank you, Olexiy. And we're doing a poll in relation to that topic. Do you think Wagner, PMC Wagner, will go launch a raid towards Warsaw? And we mean all cities under Warsaw. Could be Sulak Corridor, could be Rzeszów, could be Daugavpils. But the main point is, will they go? So out of 18,000 who voted, yes, 5%. No, they won't, 77%. And they will go, but they will not reach. And that's more sarcastic. Third version, 18%. I think this voting is somewhat important, because if you scroll back to our previous votes, which perhaps look as funny suppositions and ascientific questions, they actually did reflect a certain sense of reality, and you can check how much they are related and how much of that actually transpired after the vote to be true. Over 40,000 likes, over 100,000 viewers. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channels. We are at the 12th minute. Let's take a look at the map and discuss the rest of the news. There are a lot of news today. Where do you want to start today? Let's start with Kremenная Svatova up north. Yeah, so last time we recorded a stream saying that that front had no change of line, but right after there was a confirmation that the enemy actually pressed in the south. And if you look from afar, it looks like one line, but if you zoom closer, you can actually see it's near Zarechny, Novogorievka, Kovalevka, Karamazinka. So if you look down from Svatova at about 7 o'clock, this is where you could see a little protrusion here. See that arrow at about 7 from Svatova. Svatova is the red diamond in the middle of the red territory. So how far did they go? I think it's about 1.5 miles. There were some news that said it's a little further, up to 3 miles, and we don't have solid data here yet. So we are naming from 1.5 to 3. Looking at the area, it probably is closer to 3 miles or 3 kilometers, sorry. And Deep State is a bit more conservative, so that's likely what it is. Is it serious? It's uncomfortable, but this is not serious yet. There is no serious motion to separate us that is succeeding. They just have partial success on a part of the front, probably because that area was quiet for a while and they concentrated troops and made a rush. But the fighting goes all the way down from Brestovoye, Novoselovska up in the north to Serebryanskaya forestry in the south, to Yampol, the other protrusion here at the bottom that they're trying to change shape of and push further, but not succeeding yet. Because their main target is to connect two groups of soldiers that is separated by Seversky Donetsk. This is where they try to storm Belogorovka. You can see at the bottom 5 o'clock, arrows going up to Belogorovka, to the green protrusion. They're trying to cut this off. And in the north, they're trying to equalize the line. They have actually a pretty good group of about 100,000 troops, up to 900 tanks, but it's very difficult terrain to use that. Yet they still have advantage of artillery, and they're not shell hungry. They actually have enough supplies. However, we're defending pretty actively. We're actually going into counteroffensive in different parts of that front, but we'll see how our ideation will transpire as things will unfold. It's difficult for enemy to push in that area because, once again, I'll say that there are a lot of small rivers, hills, forested hills, and ravines, so it's difficult to continue pushing. Now we go more to the south, as if on purpose. Right before we start the stream, some sources on the Russian side, and whom we call evil tongues, they published that they're getting very sad near Bakhmut, and that Ukraine has some success. They're not saying where and how, but they are still indicating at the general areas where things are happening. So if one looks at the map, it looks like they must be getting sadder at the bottom part of Bakhmut front, near Klishevka and Andreevka, because when we talked yesterday, there was no protrusion towards Andreevka a couple days ago, and now it does exist. And one can say that they tried to create a fortification area near Andreevka, so it's in the middle between Klishevka and Kurdyumovka. You can see those 6 lower diamonds on the front line that you're seeing on the screen. So in the middle too, they were creating the fortified area, and now you can see that our troops are straight at the fortification area, and they're screaming bloody murder, so perhaps that fortification area was not too strong. And also there is some action to the north of Bakhmut as well. We see that the map moved a little further. Some time ago it was more straight. So a few days ago that line was straighter, and now it moved further to the northeast. And let's go down south to Avdiivka, another hot area. They're still trying to push near Kamenka and Kruta Balka, but I understand them. And by the way, some evil tongues are saying they succeeded in moving the front line a little, but those who have been there know the area, and those who haven't, I would say that our defense line is very serious there. And the chance that they can break through and push through that quickly, I don't think that there are any. This line holds from the beginning of the operation, and before that for 9 years. And now let's go to Vodinoy and Opitnet in the south, and Kherson. Before that, Pervomayskaya Nevelskaya. There is some pincer motion there that they're trying to execute, but they met with hard resistance, and we basically called that motion for now. And if you go south, evil tongues are screaming that Ukraine is pushing them. We don't have details, but we can say that in the area of Big Novoselka, Staromayorska, our troops succeeded in pushing further down south. And you can see that we are trying to move from the flank on the left. And also near Robotina, they're suffering some losses, and the line of front is changing. It's actually moving towards Robotina now. And you can see a protrusion at about 2 o'clock from Robotina, which is being encircled on both sides by Ukrainian forces. It's a very small protrusion that you can see is being surrounded by the blue color slowly, but it has a very important meaning in that area, so they'll feel real bad when they lose it. And also we're still holding the area near the Antonov Bridge. And what else happened? Of course, they shot Odessa. Since the last stream, they destroyed some of the houses, dozens of houses, civilian targets, and they blew up several of the historic monuments that are supposedly protected by UNESCO. So, once again, those Orthodox Christians who are so Orthodox managed to destroy one of the main Orthodox markers in the area, one of the historic buildings, churches, cathedrals. And they're destroying infrastructure in our port. They're trying to create a deferred damage in the economy of Ukraine by destroying our capacity to load cargo vessels with grain in that port. On the 26th of July, NATO and Ukraine Commission will be discussing, I think it's on Wednesday, right? We'll be discussing that situation because it has strategic repercussions for many countries. 120,000 are with us, 50,000 click the like button. Our polling about will Wagner go towards Warsaw? No. 5%, 74%, yes, 5%, and a dozen percent saying, yeah, they might, but they will not reach. At night, there was another news. There was a drone hit on Moscow. Actually, one of them hit the area that is probably about 100 yards from where I lived in Moscow when I was there. And I understand they were flying probably towards the building of General Command in Moscow, looking at their trajectory. Because where they hit, it didn't cause much damage. One fell on some military buildings, but insignificant generally. Yet, the strikes of drones by drones continue. And Moscow did say that they reserve the right to answer based on that activity. And we can see how they answer. They retaliate on Odessa. They are indeed destroying two types of targets there, civilian and cultural, and engineering grain loading capacity. And as Russia said, we'll replace that with our grain. So they obviously are creating a position for the future. And that attack on Kremlin, do you think Ukraine can intensify their efforts so that it will become more understood in Russia that one should not be bombing civilian targets like Odessa? Well, Crimea already knows that it hurts to bomb Ukrainian cities. Today, they've had more explosions near another military airfield. But you know how they treat it, Olexiy. They don't care. They think Crimea is not their own. True, but they still lost a ton of ammo. That means that all these ammo did not fall on the heads or will not fall on the heads of our soldiers. As for Moscow, I don't know about all our capacities to work on Moscow with drones and other means. I would suggest interview those who knows what we can use, what our real capabilities are, but I don't think it's possible to discuss that yet. While the hot phase of the war is going, if we can send 20, 30 vehicles to hit certain targets there. And on the civilian side, these capabilities are not known, so we'll keep that secret. I understood they did hit a data center for military intel, so that was one of the explosions. And I think people are starting slowly to understand that they're vulnerable on the Russian side of the border. And Moscow is one of the most protected cities in Russia. Well, Olexiy, no, not really. It's no, Mark. It is, comparatively speaking, it's most protected than any other town. Okay, agree. But why am I bringing this question is that Washington came out and said, gave an answer that atoms are not being transferred without any window for interpreting that. And here, from the article in Newsweek that you mentioned, there are a lot of discussions, opinions. Experts are chiming in that even before the war, with Naryshkin and with Putin, those meetings that happened in autumn when Burns met both of them, they already expected that war in Ukraine will happen, and Russia did apparently tell Burns that they will do a small operation, and the red line they discussed would be was the weapons that America could possibly transfer to Ukraine. That the red line was to not transfer anything that could be used on the territory of Russian Federation. And low intensity of that kind of support and low intensity of hits done by Ukraine on Russian territory, do you think that can be a factor that Washington is urging Ukraine not to go deep, destroying Russian targets? Mark, I have a question here. Where is that question coming from? Where's that statement coming from? to not hit targets on the territory of Russian Federation? Well, I'm bringing it up as in light of American statement from last autumn that was discussed. And what would be the repercussion in this case? Well, perhaps nuclear war. I don't know, Olexiy. Nuclear war, right? It's easy to scare those who want to be scared. Why Ukraine is not scared of radioactive war, of nuclear war? And Americans, who are much stronger than Russia and all the other armies of the world, they are supposedly so scared. Because American army is multinational standard, as it is referred often, that one army is stronger than a bunch of other armies across the world. So what? Yeah, let's pose this question to Washington, because you guys can be retreating all the time. And now we have the grain deal pressure, which looks very iffy at the current point. Kiev made a statement that it's ready to look for a transport route alternative to sea carrying capability, and there are some difficulties in establishing that, but that could be an alternative. And despite the announced meeting of Ukraine NATO Committee, it looks like there is really not much steam behind the grain deal. There is even a higher problem now, Mark, because we have our immediate neighbors who are rather against us transporting grain by trucks. And polls are saying that Ukrainians created sort of monopoly for one transport company. That's why they're defending their companies who should be able to participate in that trade. So that matter needs probably very detailed discussion and regulation. But as we understand, if our immediate neighbors are not for supporting that grain corridor, it likely will not continue working in the same capacity it did before. That's why Ukraine NATO Committee needs to get together and discuss how to do that. So you think they'll be discussing a probability of the land corridor and also possibilities for retaliation or some measures on the Black Sea? I don't believe quite in their possibility to push back on the Black Sea much, Mark. Their drone was downed and they didn't do anything. And you want them to risk anything for grain? All right, 204,000 are watching us, and the leader of NATO came out and said that our alliance with Poland is strong and will be defending every inch of Poland. Matthew Miller made a statement that collective NATO will be defending every inch of NATO land. You know, we have a joke in Kiev. Yeah, please bring it up. Yeah, the joke goes that a scary statement by the NATO officials was telling that if Russia attacks any of the NATO members, NATO will immediately exclude that member from the list of NATO countries. Yeah, right. So another news, one of the Belarus higher officers met with PMC Wagner, and they were discussing training matters, interaction between Belarus military and Wagner instructors. Both sides supposedly developed a plan of action and exchanged some requests about equipment. So do you think this goes in line of continuation of rising the stakes? Yeah, I think it goes that way. Who controls bodyguards, the representative of which was making a statement? Who controls them? I think they all are controlled by Lukashenko. Right, but which ministry? I think probably their version of FSB or something. So let me check. Belarus border, no, they're a separate group. Yeah, you know, in Russia, bodyguards are FSB. Now in Belarus, they have a special committee that oversees the border guards. Okay. Yeah, back in the day, in the 90s, we had the same structure in Russia, but that FSB took over. All right, well, it's curious to see, but I think, anyway, it goes to the view of raising stakes, to the picture of raising stakes, and since it is being discussed, that's exactly what they're doing. I'm waiting that the West comes out and says, no, we can't give you Atacoms because we need that to defend from 5,000 Wagner troops. Pathetic. All right, let's continue our stream. In Russia, we even touched upon the topic. They did increase the conscription age, and they wanted to lift both borders. They wanted to lift the lower from 18 to 21 years and to increase the top margin to 30. And instead, they increased one to 30 and kept one at 18. And they also increased from 45 to 50 the reserve officer conscription. Oh, I'm still at that 50 margin, so they can still call upon me. Oh, you're waiting for the raid to come? Right. You know, bathroom is the most innocent place I will send that raid to. So just that little logistical or legal correction that gives several 100,000 reserves that could be engaged. And if I was of that age and I was conscriptable, I would start thinking hard. Why are they doing it? Because, hey, they'll get anyone they can, Olexiy, and they will put them all in Ukrainian soil. You know, I'm thinking that their increase of military that they're announced to be bloated by 2026, I'm thinking this will not be done by the hands of the youngsters. They don't have too much demographic resource for that. They'll probably be grandpas and older men. They'll be, yeah, you'll see the bellies of people in the line. The guys of what, 50 plus up to 60 years. So what's the average lifespan in Russia? I think 65 is still statistically notional. Okay, so yeah, they basically, the country is holding a grip on their men. So nobody can get them from 18 when they become capable of making their decision to 65 when they go to grave. Wonderful, right? All right, we are at 63,000 likes. Please continue clicking the button and sharing links. 58,000 voted already in our improvised poll if Wagner will go attack Warsaw. Yeah, saying 6%, no, 70+% will go, but will not reach 20+%. Okay. Another news on how to treat it. Russian military-industrial complex is going to a level where monthly supplies of ammo that they produce, output for the front, is exceeding the annual numbers for the pre-war period. And this was referred to by Western analysts that Moscow indeed is increasing the output, the volumes of production of certain types of munitions, not on all of them, but shells, artillery shells is definitely growing. Some other positions too. We understand this is not critical for the front, but still, I should correct myself, 17 months of war, not 16. Apologies for a slip. So on the 17th month of war, they managed to ramp up and somewhat organize. How much does one need to intensify the Western supplies to counter that? Mark, let's be blunt here. They managed to take certain decisions that drastically increase their capability in certain armaments. For example, drones. They're buying those, and they're buying those at plenty. if they reach the front in these quantities, they will change situation to more difficult for us. It will not be good for us. And we, on our side, have failed to make these decisions to refit our military-industrial complex, or at least we're not seeing the results in the public media sphere yet. And war is also a competition of better quality decisions. Whoever makes the right decision sooner usually has more chances of prevailing. They appear to have made some decisions, some right decisions for themselves, and they're already exceeding the numbers that they had before, and we didn't. Not that we're not making these decisions, we are making them. Recently there was some lift on limitations for munitions for drones. They removed all the customs duties from all the drones imports on the 16th month of war, right? So we have the higher political leadership mobilized, and we have the mass and large mobilized to fight this war. But there is some mid-level bureaucrats who are still living as if they were in the peace times. Recently, we had a big blowback at some actions and some suggestions where money were spent illogically on some pathways in the parks, on some art installations. These money that could be spent on the front and could give us a competitive advantage there in difficult parts of it. And our population pushed back quite a bit, and all of a sudden, apparently, these bureaucrats found ways and means to convert this money into military support. So that was a good one. But on some items, we definitely are lagging behind. For example, for purchasing drones. We're hearing that we have a ton, but it would be nice to see that ton working on the front. According to some information, I don't know how much it can be trusted, Russia invested up to 12 billion to produce drones of all kinds. So if one would make a step back, you want to ask a question. How come the country that has Yuzhmash, a famous rocketry company, still doesn't have a missile that can reach some of the Russian ports or reach Moscow? If we have started building them in midsummer last year, we would already be ready to shoot these missiles and launch them at the military targets. And instead of the good quality drones, we have some weird ones flying, made hodgepodge in a garage. We're Navy drones. There are some volunteer drones, but there are not too many military-grade drones. What about mortars, right? We discussed that before. So that tells that we have not made some decisions timely, or perhaps have still not made these decisions. Of course, there is part information that is not public, and one can say it's not so sad when looking at that, but I've been a proponent for a long time that our economy, our industrial complex needs to be transferred to extraordinary mode in order to compete with Russia. Because if we fail to do that, it will be much harder for us to compete in the race of potentials. Because if one compares potentials, Russia has a much deeper pocket to draw from. Even under sanctions, they still have oil and gas and other resources that they can trade, and our allies will not be able to sustain us eternally. So we do need to have our own perch to lean on. And the more we rely on the allies, the more dependent we become on them. It would be nice to be more independent, right, in the long run. So we do need to conduct more effective economic politics internally. Okay, thank you. And we have more questions from our viewers. We will address that one, that military commissioner from Odessa, the head of conscription office, was captured in Kiev. And he is being charged with bribery, with corruption, and also with fleeing from military service. Well, Mark, he fled from Odessa, so yeah, that's what happened. So They found several real estate properties in Spain owned by Borisov, unlike you, Olexiy. So now I think he needs to share that with the government, right, with Ukrainian country, and now perhaps wash these crimes with blood. Do you think he can be sent to Bakhmut or Klishevka? He's an officer, right? Mark, we do not punish our criminals with front. He made a crime for which he should be stripped off his rank and put in jail. And who would send him to the front and give him people under command? He's what, colonel? Give him a brigade or make him a second face in the brigade? No. No command. Just send him as the infantryman. That's a different approach, but for that one needs a different politics. We do not do that military politics in Ukraine, and we do not punish our criminals that way. But there are a lot of works, there are a lot of tasks that need to be carried out on the front. One doesn't need to be fighting, right? There are a lot of work to be done with shovels and engineering stuff. So I don't understand why he's not being used. Well, Mark, because if it is proven that there was corruption, he should go to jail, not to the front. But I do need to check with legal people. There is a clause in Ukrainian law that if a military officer already in jail for serving time for whatever crime, he can actually apply to be sent to the front, and then he can. There is a way to send them there, but it needs to come from him voluntarily. Okay, let's ask one more question from chat. Dmitry Mezentsev is asking a lot of questions usually, so this one is good. Mark and Olexiy, what's the probability for this war to conclude in 2024 before summit in Washington that Reznikov talked about? So probability of conclusion, it's a difficult thing to prognosticate, but what can you say? Well, it's nice to use the probabilities, right? It's 50-50. It either will be or it won't be over. They depend from so many factors that's impossible to calculate. So when somebody says that he calculated that, it's a bit of an exaggeration. I think Minister of Defense came out and voiced one of the eventualities. He has a bigger picture than you and I do, and he thinks that summer of 2024 is a more realistic or optimal time frame. I think he's taking a look at American elections that will be heating up. The campaign will be heating up by that time. So he's looking at political factors, I think. And we don't know exactly how it will go. So I also want to answer to that, Olexiy. I would say that for Washington and for the Democratic administration, it is critically important to conclude that, because coming to elections of 2024 that are bound to happen in autumn with an unsolved problem of Ukraine, current administration bet a lot on that, and it will face a huge risk of Biden administration not being elected. Well, yeah, so they do need to give us F-16s, ATACMS, and others, and that's his choice. Exactly, Olexiy. That's his choice, that he needs to give that, but he'll probably face some risks that Moscow can do in retaliation. What risks, Mark? ATACMS is basically the same as Storm Shadow and Scalps that are already flying. But ATACMS are more difficult to shoot down. Do you think they're shooting down Storm Shadows? No, they're not. Well, there are not too many. It depends. It's definitely more than ATACMS, right? It's 0 ATACMS, and they're endless compared to ATACMS numbers on the front. All right, Olexiy, I will conclude here and say that for Washington to keep the same administration at the helm, to have a chance of keeping them, they need not only to finish war, or the active phase of war, it needs to transition to a different state, and also adopt Ukraine or accept Ukraine into NATO. I will tell you more. Well, nobody is listening to us. Americans have over 1,100 Patriot systems. Odessa is being destroyed. Why not to send several of those 1,100? Do you think five would be enough? Oh, 5 absolutely will cover that city. But where, right? And you can, for example, send 100 instead of 5. And out of 1,100, if you send 100, your capability doesn't diminish notably. But that would be enough to cover the whole Ukraine. Then why? Why is it not here? Well, it's a rhetorical question, I guess. I think it is. Okay, we're almost at 45 minutes. Do you think PMC Wagner will go on a raid to Warsaw? 6% say yes, they will. No, they won't. 75% will go, but will not get anywhere. The balance. So the total answer is nobody's going anywhere. By the way, Mark, do you know how many Humvees Americans have? Who? Hummers. How many? 250,000. Do you know how many we have in Ukraine? No, I don't. Well, I won't tell you, but many, many times less. If Humvee is an escalation, is it? No, I don't think it is, right? Then where? Why can't we even get proper vehicles for our infantry? Well, next time, I think on Wednesday, we can start with that. We probably will have some news. There'll be some statements that we did not discuss today about additional kinds of aid, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday. We had about 200,000 viewers, about 71,000 clicked the like button. Big ask, please continue subscribing to Feygin Live, to Olexiy Arestovych in the description to that video. You can find a link and do that. And of course to Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that in English and have not done that yet. See you on Wednesday at usual time. Good luck.
Счастливо.